Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, humans. Thaís Sky here. Welcome to the podcast. I am coming to you with a topic that is vast and varied, and there are so many levels and layers to this, but I just wanted to kind of skim the surface. Let's start the conversation. The topic du jour is, are you fixing or are you relating? And the question, this podcast episode title, invites us to think about what it means to be in relationship with another human or with anything, with ourselves, with each other, with the things around us, our relationship to, let's say, our planet, our relationship to work, our relationship to various facets of our lives. What does it mean to be in relationship? And I want to break down the episode into kind of two sections. I want to talk about fixing and relating when it comes to self, and then fixing and relating as it comes to others. Now, inherently in the title, I am juxtaposing relating and fixing. I am implying that you cannot fix yourself or others and also be in relationship with self or others. So I think it's important, if I'm making such a bold claim, to first define fixing and define relating. The first part, fixing, is slightly easier. To fix means to imply that there is something that is broken, right? We don't fix things that aren't, that are running, that are perfect. So in order to fix, there must be a belief, idea that something is broken. And so when we are thinking about fixing, we're not talking about problem solving. I want to make sure that that's super clear right on the get-go. When I'm talking about fixing, I'm not talking about problem solving. There's a difference. In problem solving, first there is consent. The other person has said, I am in trouble. There is this task. I don't know how to do this task. Can you help me? Right? I don't know what to do about this situation at work. That's different. That is consensual. That is the other person asking for support, advice, etc. And now you're problem solving. You're thinking about the problem together, in relationship together, and deciding how you want to move forward. That's problem solving. That's not what I'm referring to when I'm talking about fixing. What I'm talking about fixing is this subtle and implied belief that there's something about the other person that needs to be changed in order for you to be happy. That somebody else, or ourselves, that there's something within ourselves that if this thing isn't changed, isn't fixed, isn't eradicated, isn't bullied into submission, isn't taken care of, then we cannot be okay. We can't be happy. We can't be in the relationship. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, in order for us to talk about fixing when it comes to relationships, I want to make it super clear. I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm not talking about overtly problematic relationships. I'm not talking about someone hitting another person. I'm not talking about that extent. I'm talking about the more subtle and daily interactions with other people, with the humans around us, where we carry this belief that somehow if something within them could change, maybe their lives would change and maybe we would change. Maybe the relationship would be happier. Maybe we would be happier. Okay. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's define relating. What does it mean to be in relationship with someone? Now, I don't know if I want to be tied to this definition. I'm sure there are other definitions out there that are much more poetic, but just riffing here, I would say that to be in relationship or to be in a relational dynamic with someone means to be in a connection, to be connected to another sovereign being or sovereign entity. If we're talking about relationship to self, it means to be in a state of connection and empathy and respect for self. To be in relationship means that there is mutual love, mutual respect, mutual admiration. Now, of course, those are probably more along the lines of personal relationship, right? And maybe even friendships. It gets a little trickier what it means to be in relationship with, let's say, your boss, or in relationship with a colleague. Maybe there isn't love, but then in those moments, we're certainly invited and hopefully have experience of respect toward that person and their respect towards us. There are tenets of what is important to have in relationships. But I think something that's really, really critical when we're talking about this particular topic of fixing or relating is that there is an understanding that the other person is a full human, a sovereign being. People are not tools for your well-being. Other people are not vehicles in which, if you can contort and manipulate and change, will make you happy. Now, this is a real hard thing to wrap our minds around when we come from an experience, understanding of the world where we are been taught or have been nurtured to believe that people pleasing is a way of relating. People pleasing and relating cannot coexist. You can't actually be in relationship with someone if you are at the same time trying to get them to like you, and therefore you are only putting forth the aspects of yourself that you think that person will like. That's subtly manipulation. And I say that with love. I am a self-proclaimed people pleaser, or I have people-pleasing tendencies, whatever language we want to use there. Language is important. And I think that that's important for us to be thinking about, right? Is that we can't people please and truly be in a relationship. We can be in a pseudo relationship or a shallow relationship or a high level relationship. Let's put it that way. You can, of course, be in relationship with someone, but it's probably not going to be very meaningful if you're hiding parts of yourself. It's probably not going to be very intimate, very depth-oriented. It's not going to be very all-encompassing or the type of support and nourishment that you want from relationships if you are trying to fix the other person, right? Implied in fixing is that there's a dependency that the other person will be who you want and need them to be in order for you to be whole. We can't be in relationship and have that. So I will say that part of the definition of being in relationship is acknowledging that the other person is a sovereign human, full human, and that we are sovereign, full humans, that we are allowed to have the full spectrum of the human experience, that we are allowed to carry shadows and light, that we are not a problem that needs to be fixed. Other people are not problems that need to be fixed. We are not problems that need to be fixed. So let's break down relationship with self first, and then we'll move into relationship with others. We defined relating and we defined fixing. Now, I've been around the block in the terms of the world of self-help, self-improvement, self-development, whatever language we want to put. I've been a coach for 10 years, and 3 years ago, I started my master's in clinical psychology. I am now training to become a psychotherapist. Hopefully will be licensed in about less than a year. So on my way. And that means that I have learned a lot about psychology and the sociology, philosophy, like the study of the human condition. And in that journey, I have seen a lot of people online and books and workshops and podcasts. Yes, even here, there is a promise, right? There is usually a promise in the world of self-development that if you could just change this, everything will be better. And I'm a self-development junkie, self-professed, just like people-pleasing. I have so many books on my bookshelf, about half of which I've only started to read or half read or still in the process of reading. because I love the idea of improving self. I love the idea of loving self and growth and discovery and exploration and healing. And I see my journey as a healing journey that will take my lifetime. And I don't say that with dread. Oh, I'm going to be doing this forever. No, it's more like what a pleasure and honor and joy that I am oriented towards inner growth, and that I am oriented towards thinking about my life in terms of growth. I love that orientation. I dig it. It is so good to be thinking about my life in terms of expansion. But there's a real dangerous thing that can happen when we have a worthiness wound that is unchecked, which is that oftentimes the worthiness wound is going to run the show in believing that we are a problem, we need to be fixed, and there's someone out there or some wisdom out there, something out there that's going to make us better so that we don't have this worthiness wound anymore, so that we can be our self-confident, happy, expressed humans. The narrative is so tantalizing, isn't it? And it's what gets us so hooked into buying the million books and the million workshops and binge listening to a crap ton of podcasts. And I don't blame you, because I do it. I get it. I really, really do. But we need to be careful, because there are a lot of people out there who are going to take advantage of that. Just like any other industry, if we are not really grounded and able to see ourselves as whole humans, it's going to be very easy for us to get hooked into believing that if we changed, we'll be better. This is how capitalism runs. This is kind of the basis of our way of looking at life, right? Like, your weight is a problem and it needs to be fixed, and this is how it's going to be fixed. Your appearances are a problem. Beauty is a problem. You need to wear makeup a certain way, fashion a certain way. So while there's something wonderful about those industries as well, if we are not really grounding ourselves in our own wholeness, it can get very easy for us to get sucked into believing that the experts on social media, right, the experts on Instagram, that those people out there have the answer and we just haven't found it yet. This is a fixing orientation, a deep belief that there is something really wrong with us. It stems from a worthiness wound, that we are not enough, that we are inadequate, that we are broken, and that something outside of us is going to give us that answer. Now, that's not to say, one, that you can't do those things. Definitely not taking that away. Please keep listening to my podcast. I have hundreds some episodes. Please stay here. But what I am suggesting is that while we are in this mode, while we are in this despair, this fear that there's something inherently broken with us that needs to be fixed, while that's running the show, it's going to be very difficult to cultivate a thriving, sustainable relationship with ourselves that's filled with abundance and joy and play and creativity and intuitive prowess and expansiveness. Those two are it's very hard to coexist. It's not to say it doesn't happen. The both and is alive and real, but it is going to be really hard. And because the self-help, self-development, mental health industry, so much of these industries require us to kind of feel broken, it is going to keep perpetuating that notion that something outside of yourself is the answer. I've been, I've hired so many coaches. I've done so many workshops, all hoping for this answer. And I've learned a lot. Don't get me wrong. I've learned a lot. But what I often have found within myself is that it's very easy for me to intellectualize and hope that simply by knowledge and by insight, right, simply by knowing something about myself, that will lead to change. Intellectual knowing is powerful and wonderful and beautiful, but it's not actually the answer to the profound changes and transformation that we crave. If you look back in your life and you think about all the moments that really changed you, like really affected you, like moments that completely changed the trajectory of your life or gave you an experience that was so profound and wonderful and beautiful, when you really think about it, what was a part of that experience, right? It was emotions. It was having an emotional experience. Emotional experiences are what leads to the changes that we crave, not intellectual experiences. There's only so much that books will take you. But if you do, for example, if you read a book, there's only so much a book will do for you. But if you think about the book, digest the book, play with the book, journal with the book, like really let it settle into your bones, then things will change. Because we're taking it from an intellectual knowing to an emotional knowing. This is why I have loved that Worthy Women Rise has now become a year-long container, because it removes some of the weight of the modules having to be the changing catalyst, and it's actually now the relationships, the group dynamic, the exploration of showing up for yourself consistently that has led to the changes in the participants. So it's really, really cool what happens when we, one, stop seeing ourselves as problems that need to be fixed, and then instead start to think of ourselves in terms of relationship, in terms of self-trust, self-compassion, self-love, in terms of self-respect, in terms of how we can relate to ourselves as if we were a full, sovereign, whole human. So then you must be asking, okay, but how, right? Like, I want to cultivate self-love. I want to cultivate self-worth. I want to not view myself as a problem that needs to be fixed. But how? How do I do that? Well, one of the ways that we do that is by surrounding ourselves with relationships with people who can model and support us in doing that. And this is something that we call co-regulation. You know, when we think about co-regulation, if you're not familiar with the term, it's basically regulation means to regulate your nervous system. It means to bring your nervous system away from fight, flight, freeze, or hyperarousal and hypoarousal, and move into a more grounded, stable place within ourselves. And knowing how to tend to our nervous system, knowing how to engage or disengage our nervous system is a practice. And ideally, we have models in childhood that can guide us into learning how to regulate ourselves, how to be with our emotions without letting it consistently get overwhelming or feel like we have to make sense of our emotions alone. And so, you know, there is growing research that's showing that co-regulation, or the ability of the caregiver to be with the child as the child is navigating difficult emotions and teaching the child, this is essentially how you process this, right? Like, you don't use those words, but, you know, you name the experience the child is having, or you teach them what it means to be sad, or you teach them what it means to have this internal experience, and you breathe with them, you're with them, you hold them, right? When a baby cries and the mother holds the baby and presses the baby up against her chest, like, these are ways that we're co-regulating. The child is learning how to regulate their emotions through the use of the caregiver. There is an argument to be made that self-regulation, which means to be able to regulate ourselves, is actually is co-regulation internalized. That you don't just learn how to self-regulate out of nowhere. You don't just pluck self-regulation out of thin air and know how to do that, but actually we learn how to self-regulate, self-soothe, be with ourselves, tend to ourselves, by having been modeled co-regulation so frequently that our mirror neurons got turned on, right? And we were able to internalize the caregiver within ourselves. So now when we're self-regulating, what we're actually doing is we're co-regulating, but with that caregiver within ourselves. Does that make sense? So it's not, we can change the word self-regulation to mean that self-regulation equals co-regulation with internalized caregiver. The caregiver is now within ourselves, and now we learn how to self-regulate through that way. You know, babies don't learn how to self-regulate by being left alone in a really terrible state. That's just not how we have seen. Research shows that we learn how to take care of ourselves. So, all that to say is humans are social creatures. We need each other. And the root of so many of our greatest challenges, self-confidence, self-worth. Self-worth is a relational issue. Self-confidence is a relational issue. It's really about how well we have felt like we have belonged and been a part of something during really important years in our childhood, adolescence, and now adult years. So, there's something very intertwined between relationship to self and relationship to others. We can't really separate the two. Something I've been thinking about a lot is like, how often are introverts actually folks who haven't learned how to co-regulate, right? Like they haven't learned it because they didn't have it. So maybe introversion in some ways is a very important, valid identity. I believe that I'm an introvert, but I also wonder if there's a small sliver of people who consider themselves introverted, but are actually, have relational wounds, or even to the extent of having relational trauma that prevents them from feeling that they can be safe around other people. And that's why other people are so draining. I don't know. That's just a theory. I haven't done a lot of research or, really looked it up. So don't hold me to it, but just something that I've been thinking about. Okay, so when we're thinking about are you fixing or are you relating when it comes to sense of self, what I'm inviting is for us to think about the fact that we're not problems that need to be fixed. What if we didn't need to be fixed? What if there was nothing actually wrong with you? And what if what's being encouraged to instead is to develop a relationship with ourselves so we can be with and tolerate our difficult, messy, imperfect parts of ourselves without self-loathing, right? Without the self-destructive nature of believing that those parts of you are bad or wrong or broken or inadequate. What if a relating to self doesn't mean that we're now perfect, but a relating to self means that you can trust that whatever happens in your life, you've got your own back, that you can figure it out. What if that were to be the case? Okay. So that's the kind of question that I want you to be thinking about in terms of fixing versus relating to self. And then when we move into, okay, what does it mean in terms of fixing and relating towards others? Well, if we believe that we are problems that don't need to be fixed, how can we extend that to other people? How can we extend that to believe that people aren't broken and need to be fixed, and particularly do not need to be fixed by you? This is where I think a lot of people use the word codependency. And I think I've shared on the podcast before, I'm not a big fan of that word. I don't like that word. And in fact, you won't find me using the word codependency because I'm not a fan. I think it can very quickly and easily pathologize people who depend on other people. And I think that dependency is a very natural part of the human experience. We need each other. We can't do life without each other. We're social creatures, one, yes, and also our economy, driving down the street, we can't drive without other people, playing by the rules, right? Like we need each other. We depend on each other. I depend on farmers to grow my food. I cannot grow my own food right now. So I think dependency is a really important part of the human experience. And so that's why I don't like the word codependency, because I think it can get very quickly, easily to say that by you needing someone else, you are now codependent and you are a problem that needs to be fixed. I'm not saying that that's how everyone approaches this idea of codependency. I'm saying that that's what I've seen, and that's why I'm not a fan of that word. I prefer to think about it in terms of interdependence, because I don't like independent either, right? That we have to be independent of each other. I'm not a big fan of independent because it implies that we don't need each other again, right? So codependent versus independent, not a fan of those words. I prefer to think about it as interdependent, where we are dependent on each other and we are invited to depend on each other in such a way that we can trust that the other person is a full autonomous human and that we are full autonomous humans. What would it look like for two differentiated humans to be in relationship to each other instead of two enmeshed humans? Enmeshment is that quality where we believe that the other person, that the other person needs to be a certain way in order for us to be happy, that our happiness is reliant on the other person's way of being or behavior, etc. That is enmeshment. If we think about this in terms of attachment styles, both ambivalent attachment and avoidant attachment can be argued to be a way of enmeshing, even by avoiding the other person. There is a quality of enmeshment there where you have learned to cope by turning away from the person, hoping that if the other person changes, then you'll be able to turn back. Or if they are different, then you'll be able to turn to them. So, and then we think about secure attachment as the differentiated person. It's important that we notice when we fall into the trap of believing that someone needs to be fixed. And this can be tantalizing when the other person is believing that they need to be fixed. And then you fall into a trap of, oh, yeah, you obviously need to be fixed. You're thinking that, I'm thinking that. This is wonderful. That's not the answer. That is not the goal. The goal is for us to be able to relate to each other and be in the tension of disagreements, to be in the tension of the other person not seeing it your way. I think we're so quick to name it as gaslighting when someone has a different experience than us. There's something totally different between you saying, you did this, right? Like you did this. And then the other person saying, I didn't do that, out of a genuine, they don't feel like they did that, versus what you're believing is wrong. I feel like that's a shitty example, but you get my drift, right? You can have your own feelings and the other person may not agree. That doesn't necessarily mean it's gaslighting. It could, but it doesn't necessarily. I think we're just so quick to name the other person as bad, as narcissist, as sociopathic, as crazy, as gaslighting, the minute they do something that we don't agree with, or do something that hurts us, or do something that, we didn't want them to do. And I'm just inviting us to have a lot more space for complexity. Sure, maybe they're narcissists, but probably it's something much more nuanced. And I think it's really, really easy for us to just label the other person instead of being with the fact that maybe we just didn't want to be in relationship with them, or maybe they just hurt our feelings, or maybe they're just being their own full sovereign selves, and it's not something that we agree with. It may get to the point, right, where if a person is not in the way that you need them or want them to be, that you just don't be in relationship with them. That's totally valid. No one's forcing you to be in relationship with assholes. Certainly not I. I don't think that I am meant to be in relationship with every human who comes my way. There are plenty of people I'm like, oh, you annoy me. I don't like you. I don't want to be in relationship with you. That's all fine and valid. That's also not what I'm really talking about here. What I'm talking about here is the complexities and nuances of what happens when there's people we want to be in relationship with, and they do something that we don't necessarily agree with. And they hurt us, and they do this thing that we've hoped that if they didn't do, then we would be okay. So much of the couple's work that I do, the couple initially comes into the session secretly or not so secretly, hoping that I will be able to change their partner and that they don't have to then do any of the work. When we're focused on fixing, when we're focused on the other person is the problem, we miss the ability to be in relationship and in autonomy and in conversation and in the tension of that person. If they disagree with you, can you tolerate that? Can you be with that? Can you still love them and disagree? Or is the fact that they disagree meaning that you have to throw them away? What does it mean to be in relationships that aren't disposable simply because the other person has a viewpoint that you don't? Now, we all have to decide what that tolerance is when we're talking about topics such as racism or sexism, misogyny, all of that, transphobia, homophobia. When we're talking about kind of internalized oppression, and we're talking about belief systems around that, we each have to determine what our comfort level is. Some of us may have no capacity to be in relationship with someone that has those types of views that are different. There are so many memes that have gone around that says that we can have a difference of opinion in infrastructure and what infrastructure is more important to fix. But like, we will never agree. I cannot be in a relationship with someone that thinks that murdering Black people is acceptable, right? Like, you've seen those types of memes. And I think for many people, they're entitled to that. You don't have to be in relationship with people who hold opposing views if that's right. Like, if that's your comfort levels. And then there's other people who feel like they can be in relationship, and that maybe by being in relationship with people, they can slowly support them in thinking about things differently, or expanding their point of view, or expanding their perspective on things. I guess what I'm saying here is we all have a threshold of how much difference we can accept in our relationships, but we want to be cautious of whether or not, one, we're creating a kind of self-fulfilling container where everybody in our lives is just saying the same things we are, and we're maybe missing out on new ideas or new way of thinking or new way of being. And we want to be careful to assume or to have such a low tolerance for any disagreement or any discomfort or tension or conflict in a relationship, where if there is conflict, the person can be discarded, right? We talk about that in terms of like avoidant attachment strategy. It can be hard to be in relationship with someone who does something that really hurts you, or that you disagree with, or made a comment that feels dismissive, etc. It's really, really hard. And that's where we are encouraged to learn the tools, both the internal tools and the external tools, of how to navigate that in a way that may allow you to stay in the tension of something. And so I use the words intention a lot. And I essentially mean that conflict is a really normal part of relationship. And in fact, conflict is if you are in a relationship that doesn't have conflict, there's probably a cap to the intimacy of that relationship, because conflict implies that there's two distinct people in the relationship. If there's no conflict, there's probably enmeshment happening. And I also differentiate between conflict and fighting. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about screaming at each other. I'm not talking about harmful things being said to each other. I'm talking about conflict, a disagreement, something that's not matched up. And how do we navigate that? The difficulty about intimate partnerships is that most conflict that happens in the relationship isn't actually solvable. It's just complicated layers of two humans being in relationship together. And that can be really hard. And we often think in those moments that, we could fix this conflict through communication skills, that if we could just communicate better, the conflict would be resolved. And while communication skills is important, I would argue that most of the times what actually resolves conflict is emotional attunement, is co-regulation, is being in it together and just being in the tension of things being difficult for the both of you together, letting go of this idea that something needs to be fixed, that something needs to be changed. When you remove this mindset that conflict means that there's something that's broken, and think about it instead of as communication, right? That there's a disconnect and that the two individuals are really seeking emotional connection with each other and are having a hard time knowing how to do that and how to regulate together, and then practice doing that. That's going to be a game changer in terms of your capacity to be intimate and to be to deepen your partnerships and the relationships that are most important to you. So again, here's the question, right? Are you fixing or are you relating? And can you think about the ways in which you have attempted to fix others as a way to avoid intimacy of being in relationship with someone? And what does it mean to be in the tension of conflict and disagreement with someone while being in the relationship, right? Without pushing the relationship away. Like I said at the beginning, there's so many levels to this. There's so much more that I could share about this. But I'm going to stop it here because I think I've shared a lot and I want there to be space for you to digest this. Allow this to connect to your emotions, spend some time reflecting on what it has meant for you to fix or relate to self and others, and what you have lost out on. by being oriented towards fixing yourself and others, and also what beautiful opportunities you've had in your life by stepping into relationship with other humans and what has felt really nourishing about that. I love you all tremendously. I hope that this has been helpful for you. Please don't hesitate to share this podcast or just to let me know how this episode resonated with you. I'm very active over on Instagram at I am Thaís. I'm really looking forward to hearing your feedback, and I'll talk to you soon.